vintage furniture can be pretty valuable, and the pearl drum kit, that's easily a few $100.
With only 2 units up for auction, we gotta get whatever we can.
Auction Hunters vanished at the peak of its run, and here's why. For over 5 years, storage auctions led by Allen Haff and Clinton Jones drew strong attention. However, the show suddenly disappeared from television schedules without warning. There was no final episode framed as an ending, and no clear reason was ever fully laid out on screen. What really happened behind the scenes of the production that forced a running hit to stop so abruptly? And where are the faces behind Auction Hunters now? Join us as we uncover what really happened to Auction Hunters and where they are now. The turning point. When Auction Hunters first hit television in 2010, it didn't just enter the reality TV space, but also carved out its own lane. Built around the fast-paced world of storage auctions, the show followed 2 experienced buyers, Allen Haff and Clinton Jones, as they bid on abandoned storage units, gambling on hidden value. The premise was simple, but the execution was addictive. Every locker held a mystery, and the bids also carried a lot of risk. What made the show work wasn't just the finds, but the chemistry of the 2 actors. Allen brought deep knowledge from his background in antiques, while balanced it with instinct, negotiation skills, and bold decision-making. Their dynamic turned routine auctions into entertainment, and viewers quickly bought into the thrill. Early seasons leaned heavily into this formula: discovery, appraisal, profit. The show was surprisingly engaging, even though the original plan from the cast was only to film around 8 episodes before moving on. However, after the strong early reception, production expanded the run, extending the series far beyond its initial scope. The ratings reflected that success. Within a short period, the show secured renewals, expanded episode counts, and built a loyal audience. By 2011, it was already scaling up production, a clear signal that the network saw long-term value. At its peak, it stood as one of Spike TV's most recognizable unscripted original series. But like many reality shows that rise quickly, evolution was necessary. However, it was just as risky. In its later seasons, Auction Hunters began to shift away from its original identity. The introduction of the pawn shop format marked a turning point. Instead of focusing purely on the unpredictability of storage auctions, the show split its attention between buying units and running a business. On paper, this added depth. In practice, it diluted the core appeal. The raw, spontaneous energy of auction day was gradually replaced with more structured, less dynamic segments. At the same time, the tone began to change. The stakes felt different, and the pacing slowed. What once felt like real-time treasure hunting started to feel more curated. For longtime viewers, the shift was noticeable. Behind the scenes, things were becoming even more complicated. There were growing indications that production wasn't running as smoothly as it once was. Reports and speculation pointed toward contractual complications and an incomplete production cycle during the later stages of the show. Instead of the full slate of episodes expected, fewer were delivered, especially in Season 4. This suggested that something disrupted the process before it could fully conclude. Financial pressure may have also played a role. The auction show had moved from something unscripted to a business that required planning and efficient activities to keep running. Operating a brick-and-mortar business comes with overhead: rent, staffing, inventory, and logistics. If the business underperformed, it would have created strain not just on the stars, but on the sustainability of the show's direction. At its peak, everything looked controlled and successful on screen. But behind that momentum, pressure was already building behind the cameras. The tensions behind the scenes. As Auction Hunters began to lose its momentum on screen, The real strain was building behind the scenes where viewers couldn't see. What looked like a slowdown from the outside was, in reality, a mix of unresolved issues that made the show increasingly difficult to sustain. At the center of it all were the show's leads, Allen Haff and Clinton Jones. Their on-screen chemistry had always been one of the show's strongest assets, but long-running productions often test even the most solid partnerships. What complicated the relationship between these two were contractual obligations. Television agreements are rarely straightforward, especially when a show begins to deviate from its original plan. If episodes remained unfinished or production timelines slipped, it could trigger legal constraints preventing open discussion. As if that wasn't enough, the issue of promotion came up. For a show that once enjoyed strong visibility, the absence of clear marketing around its later stages was noticeable. Typically, returning series build anticipation through trailers, announcements, and scheduled releases. Auction Hunters didn't follow that pattern toward the end. Instead, updates became irregular, and the usual promotional cycle faded. That kind of inconsistency often signals uncertainty behind the scenes, where decisions about renewal, continuation, or restructuring are still unresolved. At the same time, the show's shift into the pawn shop business, named Half-Ton, introduced a new layer of pressure. Expanding from auction flipping into a physical retail operation was a total narrative change. These changes came with real-world financial commitments. This overlap between reality and production created a fragile balance. The more the show relied on the pawn shop angle, the more it depended on that business succeeding. As it struggled, the ripple effect was immediate, as it impacted both the storyline and the people behind it. Allen and Ton went from a position of having little more to take care of than just the van, to having a store with employees and monthly rent and other expenses to cover. Taken together, these factors paint a clearer picture. The show wasn't undone by a single dramatic event. Instead, it faced a buildup of pressures, incomplete production cycles, possible internal strain, limited communication, and the financial weight of its evolving format. Each issue on its own might have been manageable. Combined, they created a situation where continuing the show became increasingly complicated. As internal strain grew, the presentation of events started to feel more manufactured, opening the door to questions about how real everything was. Auction Hunters' show is staged. By the time Auction Hunters began losing its grip, a different kind of conversation started gaining ground. This one had less to do with ratings and more to do with credibility. Viewers weren't just watching anymore as they began to raise a lot of questions. At first, it was subtle, small inconsistencies, moments that felt just a little too convenient. A locker opened at the perfect angle, a rare item discovered at just the right time. Deals that wrapped up cleanly, almost too cleanly. For a show built on unpredictability, some outcomes began to feel unusually controlled. That's when the word started circulating. The show is staged. However, to be clear, the foundation of the show wasn't entirely fabricated. Storage auctions are real. The process of bidding, winning, and uncovering items inside abandoned units is legitimate. And both Allen Haff and Clinton Jones had real experience in that world long before the cameras arrived. But reality television doesn't operate on raw footage alone. It operates on storytelling, and storytelling requires structure. What viewers see in a 20-minute episode is often the result of hours and sometimes days of filming. To turn that into something watchable, producers rely heavily on editing. Scenes are trimmed, rearranged, and sometimes stitched together from different moments to create a smoother narrative. In that process, timelines can shift, reactions can be repositioned. Events that happened hours apart can appear back to back. The result? a version of reality that feels faster and more dramatic than it actually was. For some fans, that realization didn't come as a surprise. It's a known part of how reality TV works. But for others, especially those drawn in by the authenticity of the auction process, it felt like a breach of trust. The more polished the show became, the more it raised questions about how much of what they were watching was organic and how much was shaped. Then came the issue of recreated scenes. In television production, it's not uncommon for moments to be reshot if they weren't properly captured the first time. A discovery might be revisited, a reaction might be asked for again because it didn't happen clearly enough on camera. These recreations are meant to fill in gaps, to make sure the story is complete. But they also blur the line between documentation and performance. And once that line starts to blur, perception changes. What once felt like spontaneous discovery began to feel like setup, and everything started to look scripted. Even if the core events are real, the presentation can shift how they're interpreted. For auction hunters, this shift came at a critical time. The show was already dealing with structural changes and behind-the-scenes strain. Now, it was also facing growing skepticism from its audience. However, there was another detail that helped the show as allegations surfaced. Each episode opens with a disclaimer explaining that Allen Haff and Clinton Jones purchase hundreds of storage units annually, but only the most valuable and unusual finds are shown on the series. It also clarifies that most units generate little to no profit, emphasizing the inherent risk in storage auctions. The show further explains an 80-20 pattern, where roughly 80% of profits come from just 20% of their purchases. This framing helps contextualize the high-risk nature of the business, while also shaping the viewer's perception about if the show is real or not. The irony is that nothing fundamentally illegal or deceptive needed to happen for that doubt to take hold. The mechanics of reality television were enough. The more the show leaned into entertainment, the more it moved away from the raw authenticity that originally made it compelling. And once viewers start questioning what's real, it changes how they watch. With doubts growing around both structure and direction, something suddenly happened. The show moved toward an abrupt end that arrived without a clear public explanation. The sudden cancellation. After years of steady momentum, Auction Hunters simply stopped airing. In April 2015, the network confirmed that the show ended with its 5th season. At the end of the series, there was no dramatic farewell or carefully built final episode to close the story. Just an announcement that marked the end of one of the most recognizable unscripted series. For a show that thrived on suspense, its ending felt unusually strange. What made the cancellation more striking was the timing. On paper, Auction Hunters was still a success. It had built a loyal audience, delivered multiple seasons, and at one point stood as the longest-running non-scripted program on the network. Shows in that position don't typically disappear without explanation. Yet in this case, that explanation never fully came. Instead, what followed was silence, and speculation filled the gap. By the time the cancellation was announced, although the show was still doing well, it had already begun to show signs of strain. Behind the scenes, uncertainty was growing. But none of those factors were ever officially tied to the decision. There was no single statement pointing to ratings, internal conflict, or financial trouble. Just an end date. That absence of clarity became part of the story. For viewers, it created a lingering question. Why end a show that still had recognition, still had a fan base, and still had room to continue? In television, endings are often strategic, either driven by declining numbers or a deliberate choice to conclude at the right moment. Auction Hunters didn't clearly fit either category, which made its exit feel incomplete. There's also the way it ended that stands out. Long-running shows often build toward closure. Final episodes are designed to wrap up narratives, revisit key moments, or give audiences a sense of resolution. Auction Hunters didn't follow that pattern. Its final stretch didn't feel like a conclusion, but like a continuation that simply stopped mid-flow. For fans who had followed the journey from the beginning, that lack of closure made the ending more abrupt than it needed to be. Part of that abruptness may be tied to timing. Network decisions don't always align with storytelling. When a show reaches a point where continuation becomes complicated, the decision to end it can happen quickly. And when it does, there isn't always room to craft a proper send-off. That's exactly how this felt. The show that once built its reputation on uncovering hidden stories inside storage units ended up leaving its own story partially buried. No definitive reason, just a collection of factors that, taken together, made continuation difficult. Another factor that contributed to the end of the show was the loss behind the scenes. Recurring cast member Robin Big Sis Mate passed away in 2014 after battling ovarian cancer, shortly after stepping away from the show due to her illness. She was a 12-year survivor, and while her role wasn't central to every episode, her presence within the team added a layer of familiarity that viewers had grown used to. The show later acknowledged her passing with a tribute, but her absence was felt in ways that went beyond a single episode. However, it wasn't just one loss. Over time, several familiar faces who helped shape the show's identity began to fade from the screen. And as those pieces disappeared, the dynamic that once felt complete started to feel different. After the final season ended quietly, a lot of viewers have shifted their attention away from the question. Now, a question remains. Where are the main figures of the show, and what are they doing now? Life after Auction Hunters. When Auction Hunters came to an abrupt end, the spotlight didn't follow it off-screen. Instead, it shifted back to the individuals who built the show in the first place. And without the structure of television, their paths became quieter, but no less active. For Allen Haff, the transition was a return to familiarity. Long before television, he was already rooted in the world of antiques and collectibles. That foundation didn't disappear when the cameras stopped, as it became his focus again. Allen continued working within the antiques trade, dealing in items that require knowledge, patience, and an eye for historical value. Over time, his interests also expanded into real estate, a move that aligns closely with the kind of investment mindset the show often hinted at. Instead of bidding on storage units, he shifted toward more structured, long-term opportunities. Clinton "Ton" Jones took a slightly different route, but stayed closer to the energy that defined the show. Known for his bold personality and instinct-driven decisions, Ton remained active in the auction world. He continued traveling, sourcing items, and operating within the same high-risk, high-reward environment that made him a standout on screen. The difference now is scale and visibility. He's now working with Bass Pro Shops on educational programs for people of all ages, including knife throwing, archery, and barbecue classes. He is also working with Air Force air guns to help promote outdoor sports for children while also teaching them firearm safety. What's notable is that neither of them stepped away from the industry that made them recognizable. There was no dramatic career pivot or an attempt to reinvent themselves in a completely different space. Instead, both men returned to what they were already doing before Auction Hunters. That was not all. After Auction Hunters ended its 5-season run, the partnership between Allen Haff and Clinton "Ton" Jones came to a close. The split wasn't framed as a dramatic fallout, but it followed a period marked by production complications and shifting priorities. Part of that strain was tied to contractual obligations surrounding the show, especially as its final season did not fully align with earlier expectations. With the series gone, both men moved in different directions, focusing on their individual work in auctions and collectibles. For a while, the partnership that defined the show stayed inactive, with no clear sign of collaboration returning. Then, unexpectedly, it did. In recent years, Allen and Ton have appeared together again, this time in a more controlled and independent space: YouTube. Through content on Allen Haff's channel, they've revisited the dynamic that made them popular, but without network structure or production constraints. This popularity is what both Allen and Ton remain associated with even years after the show ended. For fans, they aren't just auctioneers or collectors. They're the faces of a specific era of reality television. There have also been occasional discussions about whether the concept could return in some form. Not necessarily with the same structure, but with the same core idea: exploring abandoned storage units and uncovering hidden value. Reboots and rebrands are common in television, especially for shows with a recognizable format. But in this case, nothing concrete has materialized. The show remains where it ended. To them, it is finished, and there's nothing that could be done. Unlike shows that overstay their welcome or completely lose their core, Auction Hunters exists in a more contained space. It had a clear rise, a visible shift, and a sudden end. What remains is the memory of what it did well: the pacing, the chemistry, the unpredictability. At the end of the day, for Allen Haff and Clinton Ton Jones, nothing really stopped. They're still active in auctions and collectibles, still buying and selling, just without cameras documenting it. The work didn't end as everything continued as it should be, but the visibility did. Which leaves one simple reality: Auction Hunters ended, but the business behind it never did. Do you think it is possible for Auction Hunters to ever realistically make a comeback after all these years? What were the most obvious signs on screen and behind the scenes that suggested the show had already reached its natural end? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.